A single prayer has the power to rewrite destiny. Not 2, not 10, just one cry from the heart, one whisper from the soul, one desperate reaching toward the heavens. And the course of a life can be changed forever. Do you remember Hannah, barren and broken, mocked by her rival? She prayed once with tears streaming down her face, and God opened her womb, giving her Samuel, a prophet who shook nations. Do you remember Elijah, standing on Mount Carmel, calling fire down from heaven? One prayer turned a nation's heart back to God. A thief on the cross, hanging between life and eternity, prayed only once, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." A one prayer, that is all it takes. My friends, the world may tell you destiny is fixed, that your life is chained by circumstances, locked in by your mistakes, sealed by your past. But I tell you, your future is not in the hands of men, not in the hands of fate, not in the hands of darkness. Your future is in the hands of the living God, and His hand moves when you pray. Do not underestimate the moment you fall to your knees. Do not despise the trembling words that come out of your mouth in the midnight hour. Heaven bends low to listen. Angels move at the sound of your cry. Chains break. Doors open. Histories are rewritten. I have seen it. I have lived it. I was a poor boy, sick, hopeless, lying in weakness. The doctors had given up, but I prayed, and heaven opened. Healing came. Life came. A future I could never have imagined began with a single prayer. From a tent church with 5 people, a prayer birthed a vision that would gather millions. Destiny is not decided by the powerful, but by the prayerful. Think of your life now. What is it you face? A sickness in your body, a failure that haunts you, a sin that chains you, a dream that has died. You look at it and think, it is impossible. But listen, prayer takes the impossible and hands it over to the God who delights in impossibilities. Prayer invites the author of the story to pick up the pen again and rewrite the next chapter. When you pray, the atmosphere shifts. When you pray, demons tremble. When you pray, heaven's power is released. When you pray, destiny bends to the will of God. Don't wait for tomorrow. Don't think you need eloquent words. Don't imagine you must climb a mountain to be heard. Wherever you are, whisper His name. Cry out from your heart. Pour out your soul. That single prayer can be the spark that ignites the fire of transformation. I tell you, nations have been changed by prayer. Families have been restored by prayer. Bodies healed, destinies turned, lives resurrected, all by one simple prayer. The world is waiting for your voice. Heaven is waiting for your cry. God is waiting for your faith. Lift your voice. Open your mouth. Release the prayer that will shake the heavens and rewrite the story of your life. A single prayer has the power to shift the course of destiny, no matter how impossible life may seem. Throughout history, one desperate cry to God has brought miraculous change, from Hannah's tears to Elijah's fire to the thief's salvation. Prayer is stronger than circumstances, failures, or human limitations, because it places the future in God's hands. Even the weakest whisper in the night can unleash heaven's authority, break chains, and open doors no man can shut. Personal testimony shows that prayer transforms hopeless beginnings into visions and victories far beyond imagination. The world, heaven, and even history wait for a single prayer of faith that can set everything into motion. A single prayer has the power to shift the course of destiny, no matter how impossible life may seem. Think about that for a moment, just one prayer. Not a lifetime of perfect devotion, not endless sacrifices, not an endless stream of holy words. A single prayer, born out of the depths of a desperate heart, can move the hand of God and bend the trajectory of a human life. So often, we believe our destiny is carved in stone, shaped by the poverty of our past, the scars of our failures, or the weight of circumstances pressing us down, we say, "This is how it is, this is how it will always be." But the truth is, what looks final to man is never final to God. He writes stories that overturn the verdict of despair. He opens doors in walls that never should have had a doorway. And he does it in response to prayer. Consider the woman in the Bible who had been bleeding for 12 years. No physician could heal her. Society had labeled her unclean. Her destiny was stamped with shame and isolation. But in a single act of faith, she reached out to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. That moment was her prayer, silent, trembling, yet filled with faith. And instantly her destiny was rewritten. No longer the rejected, but the restored. No longer the forgotten, but the healed. Or picture a modern scene, a man at the end of his rope, sitting alone in the darkness of his room, a bottle on the table, his life in ruins. Everything seems finished. His marriage is broken, his job is gone, his strength is drained. In that moment, he whispers a single prayer, "God, if you're real, help me." That one whisper, that fragile spark of faith, opens heaven's floodgates. Peace enters the room. Hope rises in his chest. What was meant to end in destruction begins a new chapter of restoration. This is the mystery and the miracle of prayer. It does not need to be loud to be powerful. It does not need to be long to be effective. It only needs to be real, and it only needs to be surrendered. One honest cry can call forth a miracle that 1,000 strategies could never produce. I know this because I have lived it. I was a frail young boy, lying sick with tuberculosis, waiting to die. My body was weak, my family was poor, and my future looked buried before it began. But I prayed, not with eloquence, not with strength, just with desperation. "God, heal me." And God answered. That single prayer rewrote my destiny. From the edge of death to the call of life. From a hopeless boy in a small corner of Korea to standing before nations, declaring the power of the living Christ. It began not with my strength, but with my prayer. So never underestimate your own voice. Never despise the moments you feel weakest, for it is often in weakness that the most powerful prayers are born. You may think, what difference can my little prayer make in the vastness of the universe? Yet heaven leans in to listen. The God who set the stars in place hears your whisper, and when he hears, he acts. That is why I say again, one single prayer spoken from the heart can shift the course of destiny. It can turn the sick into the healed, the broken into the restored, the forgotten into the chosen, the hopeless into the hopeful. It can carry you from the ashes of despair into the light of an unimaginable future. It takes only one moment of faith, one voice lifted, one prayer that dares to believe. Throughout history, one desperate cry to God has brought miraculous change, from Hannah's tears to Elijah's fire to the thief's salvation. This truth echoes across centuries, whispering through the pages of Scripture and resounding in the lives of countless believers. It is never about the length of the prayer, nor the eloquence of the words, but the authenticity of the heart that dares to call upon heaven. Look at Hannah. Year after year, she endured the pain of barrenness, mocked by her rival, misunderstood by her husband, even accused of drunkenness by the priest. Her destiny seemed sealed. She would never hold a child in her arms. But there came a day when she poured out her soul before the Lord, her lips moving though no sound escaped. That silent, desperate cry shook the heavens. God heard, God answered. Samuel was born, and with him came the prophet who anointed kings, who shaped the course of Israel's history. A single moment of anguish turned into a divine turning point because one woman dared to pray. Then consider Elijah on Mount Carmel. The nation had turned to idols, their hearts cold and their faith poisoned. He stood alone against hundreds of false prophets, a solitary figure before a nation that mocked his God. And yet Elijah prayed, not with a storm of words, not with elaborate rituals, but with one clear plea for God to reveal his power. Fire fell from heaven, the altar blazed, and the people fell on their faces crying, "The Lord, he is God." That one prayer shifted an entire nation back to truth. And then the thief on the cross, a man with no future, condemned for his crimes, nailed to die in shame. He had no offerings to bring, no good works to present, no chance to redeem himself through action. His life was moments from its end. But he looked at Jesus, and in that final hour, he whispered one prayer. "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus, with love that defied logic and mercy that knew no bounds, replied, "Today you will be with me in paradise." That single prayer carried a dying criminal from despair into eternal glory. Do you see the pattern? Every story shouts the same truth. One prayer is enough to draw the attention of heaven. The tears of a barren woman, the courage of a lone prophet, the broken cry of a dying thief. Each was met by God's unstoppable power, and the same is true today. Think of the mother who kneels by her child's bed, whispering through tears, "Lord, protect him." That prayer can surround her child with angels. Think of the young man who feels crushed by failure, who whispers in the dark, "God, give me another chance." That prayer can unlock doors of destiny he thought were forever closed. Think of the elderly father, hands trembling, who cries out, "God, don't let my family fall apart." That prayer can mend what years of conflict could not repair. This is why prayer cannot be dismissed as small or insignificant. What seems like a quiet moment in the shadows becomes thunder in the courts of heaven. A single prayer, whether it is a shout of faith, a whisper of desperation, or a groan too deep for words, carries more weight than all the powers of this world. The stories of Hannah, Elijah, and the thief are not just ancient tales, but living testimonies. They remind us that when you dare to cry out to God, even once, the impossible becomes possible, the final word is overturned, and a destiny you thought was lost can be reborn. Prayer is stronger than circumstances, failures, or human limitations, because it places the future in God's hands. Too often we measure our lives by what we see in front of us: the unpaid bills, the diagnosis, the shattered relationships, the opportunities lost. We tell ourselves, "This is it. This is all I'll ever be." We become prisoners of the visible, slaves to the weight of our own mistakes. But when prayer enters the picture, everything changes. Prayer is the moment when human weakness meets divine strength, when limited hands surrender to unlimited power. Think of Joseph, sold by his brothers, betrayed, forgotten in a prison cell. His circumstances shouted defeat. His failures seemed to overshadow his dreams. Every limitation was against him. But Joseph knew how to stay connected to God. He carried his pain into God's presence, and in time, God lifted him from the dungeon to the palace, from prisoner to prime minister. His story teaches us that circumstances may cage you for a season, but prayer keeps heaven's door open until destiny unfolds. Failures, too, lose their sting when brought before God in prayer. Peter knew this better than anyone. The night Jesus was arrested, Peter denied him 3 times. Shame gripped him. His heart was crushed. By human standards, his destiny was finished. But prayer drew him back. Jesus prayed for Peter, saying, "I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail." That prayer lifted him from despair, transformed him into the rock on which the church was built, and filled him with courage to proclaim the gospel before thousands. Failure does not have the final word when prayer writes the next chapter. And what about human limitations? The weaknesses we cannot escape? Paul carried what he called a thorn in the flesh, something that weakened him, something he begged God to remove. But in prayer, God spoke, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." That revelation turned Paul's limitation into a testimony. His weakness became the very stage for God's strength to shine. Prayer did not erase the limitation, but it transformed it into a channel of divine power. Perhaps you feel bound right now. Perhaps your circumstance is a mountain you cannot move. Your failures are chains you cannot break. Your limitations are walls you cannot climb. You look in the mirror and see nothing but defeat. But when you kneel in prayer, you shift the burden from your shoulders to God's. You are no longer limited by what you can do, because you are trusting in what He can do. The very act of prayer transfers ownership of your future from your weakness to His strength, from your hands to His hands. I have seen men rise from nothing through prayer. I have seen addicts set free, marriages restored, bodies healed, destinies redeemed, not because they had the power, not because they were flawless, not because they had all the answers, but because they prayed. They dared to place what they could not control into the hands of the one who controls all things. Prayer is not the escape of the weak. It is the weapon of the strong. It is the act of declaring, my circumstances will not define me, my failures will not bury me, my limitations will not bind me. I place my future in the hands of the God who holds eternity. When that becomes your heartbeat, no prison is too dark, no past too heavy, no weakness too great. Prayer lifts your life beyond the boundaries of earth and anchors it in the limitless possibility of heaven. Even the weakest whisper in the night can unleash heaven's authority, break chains, and open doors no man can shut. Prayer does not wait for the perfect setting, the perfect words, or the perfect strength. Sometimes it comes from trembling lips in the midnight hour, when all you can manage is a broken cry, and yet that broken cry can shake eternity. There was a man named Jacob, alone and afraid, running from his brother, burdened by his past. That night, under the stars, he wrestled with God. No choir, no temple, no audience, just a desperate man clinging with all his might. I will not let you go unless you bless me. It was not eloquence that moved heaven, it was persistence. It was not strength, but weakness clinging to strength. By morning, Jacob was no longer the same. His name was changed, his destiny transformed. One night of wrestling, one whisper of desperation turned a fugitive into Israel, the father of a nation. I have seen people whisper prayers so weak they could barely be heard, and yet those prayers carried more power than sermons shouted from rooftops. A mother kneeling beside her child's bed, whispering, Lord, protect him. A student sitting before an exam whispering, God, guide me. A worker with nothing left in his pocket whispering, Lord, provide. These prayers may sound small to human ears, but to heaven they roar like thunder. Angels move at the sound of faith, no matter how faint. Do not think prayer is powerful only when you feel strong. In fact, it is often most powerful when you feel weakest. Because when you are at the end of yourself, when your words falter and your strength fails, you are no longer leaning on your own ability. You are leaning fully on God. And that is when chains break, because His power is made perfect in weakness. I remember the early days of ministry, when our church was nothing more than a small tent. The rain would leak through the roof, the ground was muddy, the people were few, and I felt overwhelmed. Many nights I could only whisper to God, help me. It was not a polished prayer, not a long one, just a whisper in the darkness, but heaven heard it, and from that muddy tent grew a church that would touch nations. Not because the prayer was grand, but because the God who listens is great. Prayer is like a key. It doesn't matter if the hand holding the key is trembling or if the voice speaking is weak. As long as the key is used, the lock must open. The whisper may be fragile, but the door it opens is unshakable. The chains may be heavy, but the authority behind the whisper is greater. You may think, my words are too small, my faith too weak, my situation too far gone. But remember, it was not a crowd that moved God on Mount Carmel. It was one man praying. It was not armies that opened the Red Sea. It was one shepherd lifting his staff in obedience. It was not a multitude that brought salvation on the cross. It was one thief whispering a prayer in his dying breath. Never despise your whisper, for God does not measure the volume of your prayer, but the sincerity of your heart. And when sincerity rises, even in weakness, heaven responds with strength. Your whisper, trembling though it may be, can command angels, break spiritual chains, and open doors that generations before you thought were locked forever. Personal testimony shows that prayer transforms hopeless beginnings into visions and victories far beyond imagination. There is something undeniable about a story lived, something that pierces deeper than theory or ideas. You can argue with a philosophy, but you cannot argue with a life that has been changed. I stand before you as living proof that when a person lifts a prayer from the pit of despair, heaven responds and destiny bends. As a boy, I was weak in body and poor in spirit. Tuberculosis had wrapped its chains around me, and the doctors spoke of death as though it was already written into my days. My family was poor, with little hope for the future, and all I could see was a narrow road that led to an early grave. But in that place of hopelessness, I lifted a prayer, not a polished one, not a prayer full of knowledge or eloquence, but a cry from the depths of my broken heart. God heal me. God save me. It was that simple, and yet it opened heaven over my life. Healing came, and with it, a future I never imagined possible. That single prayer became the seed of a vision that grew into a ministry reaching millions. What the world declared dead, God resurrected through prayer. And I have seen the same in others. I remember a woman who came to our church, her eyes hollow, her spirit crushed. Her husband had left, her children were scattered, and she felt her life was nothing but ashes. When I asked her what kept her going, she whispered, I pray. She prayed through her tears. She prayed when no one saw. She prayed when everything around her screamed defeat. And slowly doors began to open. Her children returned. Her family was restored. Her life took on a new strength. That woman became a beacon of faith to others. Her story living testimony that hopeless beginnings are not the end when prayer is present. Prayer is the womb of vision. Out of darkness, light can be born. Out of barrenness, fruitfulness can spring forth. Out of ruins, a dream can rise like a phoenix from the ashes. When you pray, you invite God to breathe His possibilities into your impossibilities. A life without prayer remains confined by what the eyes can see, but a life of prayer lives in the unseen realm where visions are planted and victories are birthed. I think of Nehemiah, a man who began with nothing more than tears and a prayer. He wept for the broken walls of Jerusalem, and his prayer ignited a vision so strong that it carried him through opposition, danger, and impossibility. From rubble came restoration. From despair came rebuilding. From hopelessness came victory. What began with prayer ended with a city standing strong once more. Your beginning may feel like rubble. You may look at your life and see only broken stones, scattered dreams, and empty hands. But in prayer, God places a new blueprint in your spirit. He gives you eyes to see what does not yet exist. He plants a vision that defies your past, and He fuels the strength to walk it out. That is the mystery of prayer. It takes what is lifeless and turns it into a living story of grace and glory. I know this because I have walked it. I know this because I have witnessed it in countless lives. And I tell you, if prayer can transform a sick boy into a preacher to the nations, if it can take a broken family and turn it into a testimony of restoration, if it can raise a ruined city into a fortress of hope, then it can transform your beginning into a victory far beyond imagination. The world, heaven, and even history wait for a single prayer of faith that can set everything into motion. Too often we think our voices are small, our prayers insignificant, our words lost in the noise of the universe. But I tell you, nothing is more powerful, nothing carries more weight than a soul that dares to cry out to God in faith. One prayer has the power to stir the heavens, to shift the earth, and to echo across generations. Think of Moses standing at the Red Sea with an army behind him and an ocean before him. The people cried out in panic, but Moses lifted a prayer, a cry of faith. And God said, "Lift up your staff." In obedience, he stretched it out, and the waters parted. That prayer, that act of faith, split the sea and carved a highway where none had ever existed. It was not just deliverance for one man, but for an entire nation. And history itself was changed because one man prayed. Think of Daniel in Babylon, carried into exile, surrounded by a foreign culture, pressured to bow to idols. Many would have given up, many would have compromised, but Daniel prayed. 3 times a day, he opened his windows toward Jerusalem, even when it meant the lion's den. His prayer was not only a personal devotion, but a defiance against fear, a declaration of loyalty to God above all else. That single act of prayer carried him through the jaws of death, shut the mouths of lions, and became a testimony that still inspires faith thousands of years later. And think of the early church trembling under persecution, their leaders arrested, their future uncertain. They gathered in a small room, not with swords or strategies, but with prayer. They lifted their voices as one, and the place where they prayed was shaken. Boldness filled their hearts, miracles broke out, and the gospel spread like fire across the world. The prayer of a handful of believers became the spark that